Hello and welcome to today's webinar. This is part of the Regional Studies Association's Professional Development webinar series. And the topic for today is grants and funding. And we're looking at the Early Career Grants Scheme. So I'm going to begin by just giving you some little introductory remarks. Then I'm going to introduce our speakers and then we'll kick off with the presentations. So the Regional Studies Association is the global and interdisciplinary network for urban and regional research, development and policy. We support our members with the latest research, funding schemes, networking and publishing opportunities, and we provide spaces in which you can grow your research and your careers. As a response to the global crisis, the RSA board put in place a number of initiatives to support its members, but also the wider community. One of these is the Professional Development Series, this series. Another is the Region, Cities and Industry webinar series, which runs interleaved with these. We also launched a small grant scheme around pandemic-related research, and the deadline for that grant scheme is the 20th of June. Oh, sorry, 30th of June. So you're still in time if you would be interested in applying for that. Finally, running for 3 weeks in June, we have the Regions in Recovery Global E-Festival, which we're running in partnership with other organisations working in regional research. More details on all of these initiatives can be found on the RSA's website. And we also have a new app called the RSA Hub that you can download from your app store. It's free to download and it's packed with really useful information. So today, in terms of the housekeeping, please introduce yourself on the chat, the Zoom chat. If you have questions as we're going along, please put those into the Q&A box and I'll pick those up at the end and put your questions to the three speakers. If you want to tweet, please use the hashtag RSA webinar so that we can pick up the tweets and follow the discussion. So now I'm going to briefly introduce our three amazing speakers. Thank you so much for joining us. So kicking us off is Dr. Stuart Dawley, who's Senior Lecturer in Economic Geography at the Centre for Urban and Regional Development Studies, or CURDS, as I think most people know it, at Newcastle University. Stuart's research focuses on the evolution of local and regional economies, but particularly the dynamics of path creation and development. Also interested in regional competitiveness, sector studies, labour markets and migration, so a pretty broad sweep. Then the second speaker is Catherine Chang. Catherine is an urban and economic geographer. She's Assistant Professor of Geography at Macalester College in Minnesota in the US. Her interests include global urbanism, urban sustainability, policy mobilities in Asia. She kind of takes a political economics look at these, slant at these issues. And then our final contributor to this session is Jacopo Canello from the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. He's Assistant Professor of Economic Geography at the Department of Global Economics and Business. And his main research interests are global value chains, industrial districts, efficiency and productivity. Now, in this session, we are going to look at the Early Career Grant Scheme. When we started this, we thought that it was an original offer to the research community. We weren't aware of certainly other UK-based societies that were offering a similar scheme. And we know that this grant scheme is career starting for those researchers who receive it. And from time to time, we track what happens to the people that get these grants. And what we see as a pattern is that they move from often untenured, precarious employment within higher education institutions into tenured or permanent positions. So we know that we're doing good. It's a kind of feel-good scheme for the RSA. I think if we ever were short of money, this scheme is the last one that we would defend with our lives because we feel so passionate about it. What we're going to cover is what is it? How can I apply for it? What are the best ways to do some tips and hints? and the impact that this scheme can have on your career and on your research. And I think that's quite enough for me. So Stuart, can I hand over to you and ask you to share your screen and kick us off, please?
Welcome, everybody. And first of all, I'd just like to say I'm delighted to help support the Regional Studies Association, both as being a member of the research committee, but more specifically this webinar this afternoon. I think it's for over 55 years now, the RSA has been a champion for our community, and probably none so more than in the last year with the crisis context. So I think the association has been proactive, responsive and innovative, and above all supportive to us as a community. So I'd like to congratulate the team at the RSA for not just keeping the show on the road, but actually taking us into new and exciting directions. So well done. And one example of this sort of critical support that the RSA has provided but continues to provide is around funding opportunities. So we're going to focus on the early career opportunities this afternoon. But before we do that, it's worth reminding you of the full suite of opportunities that are available. There are 4 funding rounds coming up. The deadlines are around September, with the exception of the small grant scheme, which is in June. So in terms of the impressive ways the RSA are adapting to everything being virtual, the amount of resources that are available on the website are really impressive, and there's lots of insights and experiences about these different funding opportunities for you to look at. So I'd really recommend that. So we're focusing this afternoon on the early career grant scheme. And before we drill down a little bit more into some of the detail, we're just going to run a very quick poll just to gauge where people are at in terms of their experiences of applying for grants. So if you have the opportunity, please can you vote in this poll? It's just a way of just seeing where people are in terms of their experiences so far in experiencing applying for grants. So if you could vote, please, I'd ask you to do so now. And hopefully we can see the results. So in terms of, have you applied for a postdoc research grant before? We have a pretty equal split. 50% haven't, so hopefully this will be useful for those applying for their first grant. And also 50% have actually applied for a grant already, not necessarily with the RSA. And 25%, so half of those who have applied have been successful. So there's a nice mix here of people applying for the first time, but also people who have had some success, but also for others who will be looking for success in the future. So hopefully this webinar will be a good opportunity to explore a little bit more this RSA early career grant scheme. So in terms of the early career grant itself, and this again reminds us of the really important support that the RSA provides us as a community. So we're now in the 10th year of the early career grant. We've made 45 awards, totaling on just under £500,000 worth of research support. So the RSA as a learning society have provided over, well, just under £500,000 to support early career researchers within our field, which I think is really important. And this increasingly has brought in colleagues from all around the world. So there's over 10 countries who have had recipients of this award. And here's just a few faces. Many of you will recognize some of these faces here of current and previous grant holders. Many of you will recognize them because they have gone on to play really important roles in our community, not just in the Regional Studies Association, but much broader in terms of academia and policy alike. And in terms of just thinking about what sort of research people do within the early career grant scheme, our colleagues have put together a word cloud drawing upon the key terms that have been used in the titles of grants, successful grants in the past. You can see a really kind of broad array of opportunities here in terms of research, connecting to some of the key issues in our field at the time. So plenty of scope for a broad array of funding opportunities there. So just to drill down into some of the specifics of what this scheme provides for, it is targeted at early career researchers, and this is defined by the RSA within the funding handbook as colleagues who are within 5 years of their PhD on the closing date of the scheme. So it's in September this year. So if you have submitted your PhD and been awarded your PhD within 5 years of September, then you will be eligible for this. There are also additional supports available for colleagues who have experienced career interruption, and I'm sure you'll be able to get more details of this from the RSA if you think you're eligible for those extensions. So the process in terms of submitting for this award is a 2-stage application process, which I think is quite helpful, but it also, as we'll reflect on a little bit later, the 2-stage application process, it does focus very much on getting through that first stage of the application process, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. You do need to be registered with a higher education institution to actually administer the grant. So it is a requirement that grant holders are a member of or registered with a HEI to receive the grant. The project must be solely funded by the RSA, but you can think about using the grant as leverage for further funding for future projects. The grant must be a discrete project, but you could argue that it could be a pilot study for further research. And in the very enviable position that you might actually be in the running for more than one grant at any one time, you are actually limited to just one grant at a time from the Regional Studies Association. So in terms of some details on the requirement and expectations, the grants will only be allocated to single researchers. All applications must be based within a higher education institution, as we've said already. So therefore they have to be administered and regulated through the sort of higher education institutional context. You must be a current non-corporate member of the Regional Studies Association. However, members from any territorial band in the RSA's categories may apply for the grant funding, and the award has a maximum time span of 18 months. And there are a number of reporting conditions that do apply, but these aren't necessarily overly onerous or restrictive. And just to clarify again, this is targeted at early career colleagues who have their PhD. So it's a postdoc award scheme. So please don't apply if you have not yet attained your PhD. And just to provide you with a little bit of context of some of our recently funded projects and the titles that are therein, we've got recent projects from Iris, David, Maria, and Sylvia, looking at things from regional resilience through to energy transitions through to resource-based development. So there's quite a lot of detail there that we've whizzed through, and the resources available on the Regional Studies website are really excellent in terms of thinking through what is required when you apply for this particular grant scheme, and also some of the tips which you'll pick up in a little while's time as well. But I just want to reflect a little bit more on my personal experience of sitting on the research committee with the Regional Studies Association, but also more broadly just my experience in this field and thinking about applying for research funding. So first of all, it's important to recognise that it is a challenging funding landscape at the moment. And as I've already mentioned, the Regional Studies plays a great role in offering opportunities for us, whether it be fellowship grants, whether it be early career grants, and just continuing the opportunities to fund research. So this is a really important scheme, and I think the Regional Studies Association is a particular beacon for us to look to in terms of supporting our research. What I would say in terms of the early career grant, and I think Sally's hinted at this already, looking at some of the alumni who have gone through the grant scheme, is that we need to think about the really great scale and scope of this opportunity. On the one hand, in terms of scale, of £10,000, you can actually do quite a lot in terms of research funding with £10,000, especially sort of in the early career context. At the same time, however, there are limits to what you can do with £10,000. So it is worthwhile thinking through not to try and overreach when you actually make your application, but to recognise, you know, £10,000 is quite a helpful sum in terms of developing early research ideas. But as importantly for me, I think the scope of this opportunity is to be highly valued. First of all, it really does build your profile within the Regional Studies Association and networks more generally. It helps build networks as well, because you connect with other members of the association, you connect with members of the board, you get the support from the Regional Studies Association, and you become kind of a node within that network for a period of time. I also think it acts as a real foundation for future bids as well. And again, you just look at the alumni who have gone through this particular funding opportunity to see how they have used this as a stepping stone to build their funding success on future grants, whether it be with the RSA or with other opportunities. So I think it's great as a career development opportunity. So the scope of this is really important. Just thinking about the actual technique and craft of applying, having looked at many of these over the years as a member of the research board, the research committee, the hook is absolutely critical, especially as it's a two-stage process. So your first stage submission, you only have about 500 words to summarize what your research is about. And there are lots of applications to this particular funding opportunity. So you need to be distinctive. It needs to be clear and concise without wanting to be, kind of adopt corporate speak. It's really to get the ultimate selling point of what your research is about. It's about being clear and often saying more with less. That's really important. I think you need to try and, within those 500 words in that first stage process, really convince the reader why this work is important, why the research questions you're asking are important, why they are timely, and why it should be funded. In this, it could also be linking to the sorts of outputs that could come out of it in terms of journal articles that are really well targeted, linked maybe to the agendas, to the policy connections, and things like that. And also think a little bit about, this is developing early career researchers. So just think about why you and why now. And can you build something in there about yourself and why this is important for you and how you will be able to benefit from this. So there are a few tips. And I think you may look at the first stage of the process and think, well, it is only 500 words. I'll actually hold a lot of my effort back until the second stage if I get through and do the bigger one. Well, actually, that's the wrong way of doing it. You need to get through the door with the first stage, but also if you can get your argument across in 500 words, then that is half the battle. It's often, colleagues find it often more difficult to get the message across in 500 words than they do in 5,000 words, but this is what this is requiring from you. So there are kind of some of the broader tips in terms of style. A few more practical tips. The first one is to ensure the application is relevant and seeks to complement by either extending or deepening what it is the RSA is about. You're applying for some valuable funding from a learned society, so it's really important that you connect your research to what the learned society is trying to further develop. So look across the topics that are being covered in the journals, across the conference calls and things like that, and really try and connect your research to what the RSA is trying to develop and prosecute. I think also the RSA have got a fantastic team. You've seen how they're innovating with social media, putting on these webinars, all the sorts of virtual support you're getting now. And I think, you know, you want to work with the Regional Studies Association to get the full benefit of your grant, to work with them to help raise the profile of your research, work with them through the many events and workshops and conferences, whether it be virtual or in person, and actually really embed yourself through the research grant with the research community here at the RSA. And I think you'll get much more out of that experience. And the final thing before I hand over to my colleagues is just to double check the funding criteria before you expend a lot of energy and time. We just need to make sure that you are eligible to apply for this, and the research and the costs that you're asking for are eligible to be funded. And we just simply direct you to the really helpful in detailed guidance on the Regional Study Association webpage. Okay, so I'll hand over now.
Thank you very much, Stuart. That was really great, and it was really clear. And I really liked the point that you made about work with the RSA and use us as a resource. We can do a great deal to support researchers who have got our grants. And one of those things is if you publish the work from the grant, we will help you with article level marketing. So my colleagues within the office will do some tweeting, you know, LinkedIn posts and so on to try and promote the work that you've done as part of a kind of working smarter, not harder initiative. So definitely turn to us if you're not sure, and we will always answer your questions about the grant. The whole point about this grant is that it's a capacity building grant. So the aim is to teach the people who have them the craft of managing larger research projects. And to that end, we will be as helpful as we can be. Now, without further ado, let's move to the first of our speakers who's actually been successful in getting a grant. Catherine, would you like to share your screen?
So hi everyone, so I'm I-Chun Chang from Macalester College Geography Department. So I'm actually one of the awardees from 2018, and I'm here today just actually to share some of the reason why I applied for this grant and my experience with this grant, and also a little bit tips actually for you if you're thinking about applying soon for this cycle. So why actually I applied for this early career grant and I successfully got it? A couple of reasons actually for me, and that's actually tied to my research project. So the very reason why I applied for this was because this grant is actually exactly designed for to support agenda setting pilot research for early career researchers. So a little bit about my research and the context about kind of when I actually applied for this, why I do this. So when I applied, that was actually my third year after I completed my PhD. And then I just kind of, at that time, basically, I started with a tenure track job, and then I have done with publishing out of my dissertation. So that was actually about the time thinking about, okay, what should I do for my next stage of research? And then that actually can build upon my previous work. So, so my doctoral dissertation research early on was actually informed by the policy mobilities paradigm, and it was actually focused on the eco-urbanism models and how the so-called eco-city projects circulate across the cities. But during my actually doctoral dissertation research and also all the follow-up actually research, I often heard government officials and local urban planners actually say that they really actually wanted to adopt eco-urbanism models to their own urban planning, but it's not an affordable option for them, especially in cities in developing Asia, right? And also, meanwhile, I also kind of in that research process and the follow-up, I observed that this emergence of a very active profit-driven urban planning industry. And those actual industry basically promote a kind of new mode of technologically oriented sustainable urbanism models. And then they actually try to actively seek out clients, typically the local governments, and then to subscribe to their best practice urbanism kind of technology and models and their proprietary technologies. Then they are expensive. So in order actually to persuade those actually local governments to buy this, these actually industries and then those actually ambitious models, basically they are become actually bundled with financing schemes, and then basically that they will actually could be provided by corporations or banking institutions or the all actually different kind of actually some of them will be philanthropy foundations, and then kind of to make them more affordable to the city. But so what I actually seeing on the ground was that, okay, I did the policy, mobility research. I was chasing the policy, but then I also actually realized, wait a minute, the process of this is that the finance actually matters. But policy mobility research hasn't really talked about how municipal financial arrangements and the financing schemes could influence urban planning regimes and their policy circulation pathways. So that was actually kind of the time when I feel like, okay, so this is the time I really actually want to start with a new research agenda. I want to actually explore something. So I really think about that in addition to follow the policy, I want to try to follow the money and to see from such perspective whether I will be able to find different policy mobility processes. And I do need funding to support my new line of research. So I did. So I did applied. That was actually the project I got. I applied and I successfully got that funding. So that's actually kind of because of actually this kind of grant is exactly setting for that pilot research. So that's how actually really kind of resonated with me very well, and it's actually kind of feed my purpose for this actually pretty okay. But only on top of this is also other reasons why I applied for this. So one thing which I find is very useful for the early career grant is that the application is really kind of manageable for early career researchers. So back then I was a new tenure track faculty, still adjusting to the job and then crazy busy every day. But the application per se is actually relatively short. It was actually being said earlier that it's actually go with 2 stages. The first round is actually more about kind of a description of it, and then second round, if you are successful, and all the timeline to basically fall into the summertime, not in the semester time. So which means that I will be able to do it. So the length, the timeline, the 2-stage kind of application process just is very friendly to early career faculty who are often overwhelmed by many responsibilities during semester. So I really appreciate it. So this is actually another reason for that. And then on top of those, again, so another reason for this is that the money. So I know people probably are thinking about 10K British pounds is not a lot, but indeed it's just good amount for me and good enough for me to do international field research for 2 summers. And that's actually by doing so, I could actually yield some results for publication before I go up for tenure. So this is actually just fits into my timeline perfectly. And then also I just recently got my tenure. So this is actually kind of I really appreciate the support from this grant. And then the only time really when I worry about whether the grant amount will be not so kind of sufficient is the time when the Brexit become the reality and you start to see the depreciation of the British pounds very quickly. That was the only time I was like, oh, I'm a little worried about it. But luckily, my institution actually pledged to say that, okay, they were going to match the differences due to the currency fluctuation. So I was very lucky on this front. And then I kind of be fully support in its process. Also, what I actually find very kind of helpful and really actually really appreciate is that ISA is really actually willing to work with higher education institutions. So from the beginning of actually you apply, this is a part of the process will be you need to actually acquire agreements actually from your institution. So everyone actually will know that you're applying, and then the grant office actually at our college actually also knows I actually got this grant. And I actually will work actually with our grant office to support us. And good thing is that then the funds actually will later on be managed locally in our college, so that I can actually constantly actually checking with my grant office and ask, okay, how much I still have left. And the timeline, the IRB kind of processes, everything actually just be managed actually within our college locally, and together they work with ISA. So I think this is actually a benefit for us. It's make this process very straightforward, rather than for us to actually the grant holders actually need to actually communicate with the organization directly on many details. No, you actually kind of do that locally, and ISA then work with your college or university. So that's actually pretty great. Another thing which I also kind of reason for this, and also I find out further kind of later on after I got the grants, actually even more appreciated, is that ISA really actually has a great supporting network and really have a lots of actually wonderful resources. It's also provide opportunities actually for building collaborations. So after actually I got the grant, I started actually I also become a member. This is an important thing. You need to become a member first in order to apply. So that's actually a good thing. So I discovered as being a member of ISA, there's a lot of actually webinars series not only for my intellectual interest, but also for my professional development. And after I got the grant, RSA also helped me actually say, oh, it's really your research actually looks actually connect to several of research networks we have. So I was actually being connected to, for example, the financial geography networks and actually several other actually researchers because of RSA. So that is really, really wonderful. And the research actually I actually got a chance to do also actually helped me expand my kind of agenda, research agenda. And with that, actually further helped me pursue new comparative research projects with colleagues from several international cities. So this is actually something I'm doing right now. And this is kind of a next stage of my research. And really actually everything is really thanks to this grant and the research actually I got a chance to do as a pilot research. And then finally, why I say early career grant for me. This is a kind of a couple of things I noticed when I actually apply. I have already noticed that this is actually flexibility being built into this grant. So if you actually read the policy carefully, this is actually a place where they say that if you actually run into difficulties or challenges, they are actually willing to actually help you and work with you to see if you need extension or actually make sure that actually grants will be really actually support you in this way. So one thing, for example, just like many young female academics, I want to start my family. And I constantly worry about how my, for example, pregnancy, childbirth would influence my career. And I'm very impressed that actually when I actually was applying, I noticed that actually RSA has a policy say that they're going to support academics in childbearing age, specifying that if you become pregnant or you actually have a child, you can actually work with them actually to actually seek extension to make sure it's still workable and it's actually can go and can over support your career. So I really, really appreciate it when I apply. I noticed that already. And later on also, the fact that pilot research actually can run into many challenges. So for example, for mine too, I actually run into several challenges. My research was originally planned to do case studies in China. But because of actually there was a sudden change of China's political situation in early 2019, local government officials become hesitant to talk about kind of local government finance because they are worried that any discussion about money back to them may actually make them kind of actually more susceptible to accusations of kind of corruption. And this actually could actually have actually serious consequences for those my informants in the local in the local Chinese cities. So I actually had, because of that kind of ethical concern, I had to change case studies location to Taiwan. And I really appreciate that the RSA fully support my kind of change of the location. And indeed, after the change of the case study site, the project has been going very well. So that's actually kind of flexibility and support that really actually make me feel I really love this grant and really appreciate this. And I think people should apply. Thinking about all those actually flexible as well. Also, we are now in the COVID, and then apparently kind of international travel, international field research become challenging. So I have been working with RSA about to think about what should I do, and I kind of really appreciate I actually got a further extension to handle this issue. So this is actually pretty much why, and also kind of part of my experience why I applied, and together with a little bit about my project. So if there's any tips I have for our future applicants, there's a couple of things, because I'm not actually sit in the evaluation committee, so I don't know why I was selected. But from my perspective, when I prepare my kind of grant application, here's how I imagine about my project and the way how I think about this. So I think that by the time when I was doing this, you probably actually can understand already that's based upon the information I provided about my background and the context. I really actually imagined this is a pilot project. That's what helped me to explore new research directions and to develop a new research agenda. So this is really, for me, is at that stage of scholarship. That is actually kind of move and grow out of my doctoral dissertation. Right, so that's actually, I imagine this should be a project like this. And that's actually a project, and definitely I will assist my career development. Both sides, one is intellectually, I want to actually pursue a new intellectual inquiry. But on the other hand, it's also something which I can actually see that tied to my tenure timeline, and knowing this actually can help me be successful in that time. And also actually the grant is not too huge, so easy to manage as a kind of early career researcher and then a faculty member, and make it actually really doable, and you have some result within before you actually go out for tenure. So I think that's pretty important, and knowing that is actually kind of show that in your application. And then I think also very importantly, not only about assist your kind of professional development in kind of intellectual inquiries, but it's also actually you need to make sure this research actually has something to say to the current actually theoretical debates, and then actually can make actually contribution to the society as well. So I think those actually larger implications need to be mentioned and clearly state in your research application, and that's probably can help you stand out from the crowd. And then with actually kind of 10K, this research and also actually with that amount of grant, you probably need to plan the money very carefully because it's not too much. So how could you actually use it to maximize the kind of the capacity of this grant to actually provide you, which means you need a very practical and manageable research plan and with realistic objectives and very reasonable budget, and try to plan out well. And that's actually will show people that you really actually carefully craft your research activity. And then finally, I would say during the application process, I actually send out emails to RSA and ask a bunch of questions. And then I always actually they always respond me with answers. And then they're very passionate, patient, and also very passionate about supporting early career researchers. So don't hesitate to reach out to RSA if you have any questions in this application process. And I think it's the most important tip in for this application. And that's pretty much I have for that.
Thank you very much, Catherine. You know, one of the things that's really interesting about doing these webinars is you always learn something when you do them. So I had no idea that having the grant deadline at the end of the summer holidays was so important, but that's obviously something that we will now build into our thinking for future grants. It's great that you that both you and Stuart liked the two-stage process, and we've done that to stop redundancy of effort. So, excuse me, we know that early careers are making lots of applications. So the first application is light effort in terms of the amount of detail. Although Stuart's right, you have to get the concept right in that first application to get through. And then the last thing that I learned from your presentation was around the value of the pound and what happens if the pound depreciates during the period of the grant, which I had not thought about and which is a takeaway for me. So thank you very much, Catherine. We're moving now to our third speaker, Jacopo. Some people are already putting questions in the Q&A. Some have been answered by my colleagues. We will pick up some of those questions, and I have some in my hand. So we want to make sure that we leave time for those questions. And right at the end of the seminar, we have a little celebration, and I want to give a little something to our speakers. So please stay on just while I make a little presentation to our speakers. So Jacopo, over to you.
Thank you, Sally. So let me share my screen. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody, and I'm glad to be here, like to give you my contribution to this webinar. I'm an assistant professor of economic geography at the Department of Global Economics and Management at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. And I'm also proud to be an RSA member since 2012. So it was the year after I started my PhD that I started being a member of this association. And obviously, I'm proud to be a member and also one of the recipients of the 2019 RSA Early Career Grants. So next 10 minutes, I'll try to be as quick as possible. Just want to give you a brief overview of the project that was funded in 2019, just a very brief overview of what I did and how I use these grants to support my research. And finally, I'll try to give you some tips for those of you who are planning to apply in next September. So from my personal view, my personal experience, what are some of the strategies that you need to use to be successful in this application, okay? All right, so let me start with my research project. Again, very briefly, the idea of this project, which is part of my research activities. Like in the last few years, I have been interested in global value chains and how the transformation of global value chains are affecting regional development and the structure of regional production network. So in this specific case, for this specific project, the aim was to study how local shocks, right, and we are talking about specifically about production relocation shocks, right? So what happens when firms decide to relocate production activities to foreign country? As we know, there are impacts on the receiving countries, but also impacts in the countries and in the regions where these firms are located, okay? So the idea of this project was to assess how small firms and especially small contractors react to production relocation shocks that are occurring in the regions where they are embedded, right? So the idea is that when my client moves abroad, this is obviously a local shock for small firms. What are the strategies that these small firms employ in order to adapt to this transformation? And as you can imagine, this is kind of a hot topic, especially in light of the recent transformation that have occurred in global value chain in the last few years. Obviously, COVID-19 is one of the major global shock that occurred in the last year and have affected the way global value chain function. So there have been major disruption as a consequence of the restriction imposed by developed and developing countries. So what are the consequences of these transformation on the territories and on regional development? So basically, this project has two main research questions. The first one is the degree to which the different production internationalization strategy affect the decision and especially the upgrading strategy of small subcontractor in the home region where client firms are located. And then whether this forced upgrading is beneficial for the performances of small subcontractors, right? So these were the two main research questions that I have tried to address in this research project. And as you can imagine, the early career grant has been extremely helpful in allowing me to develop this project effectively. So just to give you an idea of some of the ways I use the RSA early career grant, right, to make this research process successful. The first aspect relates to the data collection and preparation process. So one of the key challenges of this project is to combine two main data sources that I've collected from the Italian Ministry of Economy and Finance annual survey and also from Orbis historical database. So we are talking about two huge databases that needed to be cleaned and prepared in order to come up with the final database. So the early career grant has been extremely helpful for me to ask for technical support from the data science team of my university. My university has a Center for Information Technology with experts that are obviously prepared to provide this kind of support. So one of the advantages of having the early career grant was to receive support from the data science team of my university to be able to come up with the database that I used for my research project. Teaching buyout, that was another, obviously, for, I guess, all of you who have been involved in teaching activities in the last year. We know how COVID-19 has changed, right? The way we teach. So we have moved our courses online. The process of transforming and redeveloping courses for online or hybrid teaching is very time consuming. So I was really grateful to the RSA for providing me the funding in order to reduce the teaching load and being able to focus more on my research. So that's definitely something you should consider, including in your budget if you apply for this grant. Conferences, again, another obviously aspect that has been affected by, unfortunately, by the COVID-19 crisis. As you know, most of conferences are now taking place online, and obviously as we know, right, this is not the same as interactive on a real setting, even if I think it's very helpful to still use this online conference as a networking opportunity and to receive feedback. So I was able to use the early career grant also to attend these online conferences and receive feedback from peers on my research in order to improve my empirical analysis before submitting the paper to academic journals. Last but not least, as already mentioned by Stuart, if I remember correctly, the idea of this grant, this is obviously an excellent opportunity also in terms of leverage for further funding. So now I'm using this project as a starting point to develop a broader research project, and the plan is to apply for the VD scheme funded by the Dutch government next October, and also ERC starting grants. These are examples of large grants. I mean, we are talking about obviously 5 years of funding, but these grant gives you an excellent opportunity to learn, right, how to write a successful application, how to develop an effective budget. So I think this is also something to keep in mind. Being successful, the RSA Early Career Grant can also be something that can help you, right, to be successful in other grant application. Now, in terms of suggestions, so I think both Stuart and Catherine already covered some of these aspects. So I'm obviously the idea of developing a very clear and feasible project. So keep in mind that typically you have 1 year to develop this research project. So you should find a very clear research question. You should write your proposal in a concise way. You should deliver your message in an effective way, and that's even more challenging given the word limit that is provided for these applications. So I think it's very important, given the word limit, that you convey the main message of your research. Why is this research relevant? Why you are the right person for this research project? Okay. Make sure you reach a broad audience. As we all know, right, the RSA is interested in reaching out to academics, but also policymaker, to practitioner. So it is important that you develop very effective dissemination plans. So who are the stakeholders that you plan to reach? How do you plan to reach these stakeholders? This is very important for the RSA. This is very important for your research plan. So you need to be convincing in terms of how you will reach these stakeholders and whether your research will have a broader impact also outside the academic community. This is very important. As Stuart and Catherine mentioned already, your project should be relevant for the RSA, of course, right? There are many different sources on the RSA website that you can use to verify the RSA development plan, right? What are the main goals of the RSA and how your research can basically contribute to address these goals. So these are important aspects that you need to keep in mind when you prepare your application. Now, I hope this does not apply for the next year. We hope that very soon we'll move to a normal situation, right? So COVID-19 will not impact our lives and our research so much in the next few months. But I think it's important that you reflect about how all these circumstances can potentially affect your research plan, right? In terms of data collection, all the different stages of your research project, it is important that you reflect how the current circumstances can affect your research plan. Ask for feedback. This is very important. Again, this has to be your idea, your research idea, but it's also important that you exploit your network of senior and junior research, right? So once you have the draft of your application, it's important that you share ideas with your network. Ask also peers that are outside your niche, outside your research field. It's important that you verify whether your ideas can reach out a broad audience, right? So I think it's very important to exploit your network and ask for feedback. Last but not least, don't give up if you are rejected. So we know we are academics, we face rejection on a regular basis. I also faced rejection. Well, first time I applied for this grant. So my suggestion is, if you applied and you were rejected, use this rejection as a way to improve your application and eventually, I hope for you, being successful the next time you apply, right? So for those of you who have been unsuccessful, don't give up and apply again, improve your projects, and you can still make it, right? Even if you weren't successful in the previous year.
Brilliant.
All right, so I think time is up. Otherwise, we don't have time for questions. Thank you very much. And if you have more questions, you can contact my email or you can reach out through my personal website. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jacopo. That's we think we've had 3 really informative presentations. I think, yes, the 3 points I took from your presentation are, yes, the project needs to be regional, look at the journals. Yes, think about how you're going to disseminate your results, because it's how you disseminate your results that will lead to the benefit for your career and your network. And definitely think about contingencies for your research if you're applying this year and there's a possibility that COVID might be there. And the final point, keep trying. Yes, keep trying. That's permitted. We have some questions. What I thought I would do is just deal with a couple that are unanswered on the Q&A, and then I hold a couple of questions. So the first question, which I'm going to put to Stuart, is, do we receive feedback if we're not successful? Perhaps maybe, Stuart, shall I take that?
Happy for you to, Sally, yeah.
Okay, so we don't give feedback, detailed feedback on unsuccessful applications, and we are really sorry about that. It's a question that comes up in every round. The reason we don't do it is that we get over 200 grant applications across our 5 or 6 now grant schemes every year. And all the people who are involved are busy academics, and it's a lot of applications for them to read, so we don't give feedback. But what we do is give hints and tips about how not to be rejected. And to that end, I'm going to ask my first question to Stuart, a rather negative question. So what are the 3 main reasons that proposals get rejected or get marked down by the research committee members?
Okay, well, I probably think one of the most important ones is that maybe the application doesn't quite fit the rules of the scheme, and therefore the application doesn't fit. So that's something which hopefully the applicant can actually filter before the application is submitted by just double checking, as we've stressed throughout the presentations, just double checking the fit is there. I think the second point would be, which we've all connected to in our conversations, is make sure it's relevant to the field of regional studies in terms of research, but also policy. Make sure it kind of connects to the issues, the themes and the agendas which the RSA is furthering. And also, I think the final thing is, I mentioned this in terms of the scale of £10,000. It's possible to do quite a lot with £10,000, but it does limit what you can do. So you have to be realistic and manage expectations. And I think that level of pragmatism can also come through. There's something that will be marked up, but also if it's unrealistic, it would be marked down. So I guess they're the 3 things, Sally, that I would highlight.
Thank you. And a question from Patricia is, how many applications does the RSA usually receive for this grant scheme? That's quite a difficult one to answer, and I'm going to ask my colleague Clara to answer that in the chat. Clara, could you please do that, because Clara is better informed than me to be able to do that, but I didn't want to leave that unanswered. What I would say is that in comparison with a national open subject grant, this will be a smaller field of applications because it's a single kind of field of people. So you do stand quite a reasonable chance. To quickly drop through the Q&As that we've already answered, Rodrigo has said, if the project is granted, or Melanie said, if the project is granted to a single early career researcher, can the outputs at the end be co-authored? yes, the outputs can be co-authored, but you have to write your end of grant report yourself. The early career grants scheme does not cover researchers who still don't have their PhD. You have to have your PhD, or you have to write to us and ask if you're eligible to apply. So if you're maybe somebody that hasn't finished their PhD, but you're working in a university doing lecturing, so maybe you'll finish your PhD much later by documents, then you can ask us. Generally speaking, you need a PhD. What happens if a grant holder changes institution, having got the grant? Our grants are portable, so you can move with the grant, and quite often that does happen. And mostly the institutions are quite supportive. So this is a question that I'd like to put to Catherine and Jacopo. If I'm successful, is it really worth engaging with social media around my project? So is it worth tweeting out that I've got the grant? Is it worth tweeting out that I've got a publication forthcoming? Is it worth, is the effort worth it? Catherine, perhaps first.
So I didn't actually engage in social media very much, but I did actually post that I got the grant on my Facebook. So I can tell you what's actually comes. On the one hand, you got a list of friends come to actually congratulate you, but on the other hand, I do actually have colleagues actually start to say, hey, that's actually the new research direction I'm also thinking about moving into. So we actually got the chance to actually talk about this, and then indeed from that, I built a pretty good collaboration. So I would say, think actually kind of afterwards, I probably actually would tweet that or do Facebook posts a little bit more often about my research project for the future.
Great, thank you. Jacopo.
Yeah, as I must admit that I'm also not very engaged in social media, but at the same time, I think that advertising your research on social media, and also not only by using your own Twitter or Facebook account, but also exploiting the RSA network, right? So the RSA has a number of different possibility for you to, and they are always very supportive, in terms of advertising the research of their members in their blogs or e-zines or their social networks. So I found a lot of benefits in terms of visibility, from direct and indirect use of social media. So if I think about, for example, PhD students reaching me out because they saw my research on the RSA website. So I received several emails from students that wanted to be supervised because they noticed my research activity through the RSA. So I think definitely, even if you are successful, it's a very important strategy in order to increase your visibility and eventually also the impact of your research in terms of citation, but also in terms of reaching a broader audience. I definitely agree.
Lovely, thank you. I'm very naughty of you both not to be really on it with your social media. We do encourage you to be self-promoters. You need to look at people like Henry Young, Jamie Peck, Michael Storper. These people are active on social media. They have their recently published articles below their signatures on their emails. And it's not because they're show-offs, it's because they want to start a conversation and grow the network and bring people into the orbit of their work. So we really do encourage that. Stuart, I've got one more question for you, and then I just want to say a few words about a little celebration that we're having this afternoon. So Stuart, if a successful applicant wants to change the direction of their research after they've received the grant, can they do that? How does that work?
Yes, I think that that is possible, but I think it's best practice to always check in with the RSA before you do that. Partly just to get advice and keep the RSA in the loop because they are actually funding the research, but also recognizing that the RSA actually pay the funding in 2 installments. So once you get the grant, and then there's a second funding installment partway through the grant. So if you're changing direction, I think it's fair to keep the RSA in the loop, but at the same time, the RSA are very realistic and pragmatic. Things change in the real world, so they will support that.
Lovely, thank you very much. I wonder if, Katerina, you could share a couple of slides that I've prepared. Could you move on to the next slide for me, please? So this Facebook reminded me this morning that today is the anniversary of a year of webinars that we've been running for the wider community. And I just thought you'd like to see the stats for this year. So just for the professional development webinars, we've had 3,800 live attendees at these short capacity building webinars. We had 6,200 registrants, which is a conversion rate of 61%, which is actually really, really high. And the figure we haven't given you there is the number of people who have subsequently viewed the recording, which goes into the RSA lounge on our website. And we looked at that only a few weeks ago. We were absolutely astonished by how many people return to these webinars. They missed it live because life interrupts, but they go back and they watch it. We were really heartened by the number of people that are doing that. The number of countries, well, it's up to 52 different countries for each webinar. So going online and not charging has opened these events to a much wider audience than ever before. Can we have the next slide, please? So a sample of some of the topics that we're picking up under these webinars. So publishing, career development, the grants and funding that is there, academic writing and research. I think we will be doing more on that. We've done quite a bit on presentation skills. So if you're interested in that, both for face-to-face presentations and virtual, then go and have a look in the RSA lounge on our website, and you'll find all of the list of webinars that have been edited and are available for you to watch. Now, this is a celebration. It's 1 year. We're not celebrating COVID. We're celebrating getting through the first year of COVID. But we thought we would like to mark the occasion with a small token of appreciation for our 3 amazing speakers today. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So in the post to our speakers, you will be receiving a stick of Brighton Rock. Now, if you don't know what Brighton Rock is, it's a kind of hard, sugary, minty flavored sweet, definitely to suck, don't chew it or you'll end up at the dentist, but very, very traditional seaside sweet, quite an old-fashioned sweet, but a bit of fun. Yeah, personally, I'm not a fan. Let us know how you get on with it. And we're going to send each of you a pair of Brighton Skyline socks. And these socks come from a company that if you buy a pair of socks, they donate a pair of socks to a homeless charity. So a homeless person gets a pair of socks for each pair of socks that we give out to a speaker. And I think in a time where actually being kind has come up the political agenda and the need to help our neighbours, and to be aware that people are not having a great time, it felt like the right thing to do to give a smaller gift to you, but a gift that gives to somebody who has less than us. You know, however hard up we all think we are, we're still in a better position than people on the streets. So these gifts will be in the post to you. Probably, Catherine, it will take longer to get to you because of physical difference. But yes, we hope that you will enjoy those gifts. In closing this webinar, I would like to thank you all for joining me today. So Stuart, Jacopo and Catherine, you've been amazing. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank my colleagues in the RSA office for the work that they do behind the scene. They're really the unsung heroes of the COVID year. They've shouldered the burden and they've been really flexible and resilient, and I'm incredibly proud of what they've achieved. So particularly Katerina and Alex, thank you very much. And then finally, I'd really like to thank all of you for attending. We know that you have other calls on your time, and it's wonderful that you've chosen to spend this hour with us, and it's been great to interact with you. And then finally, I encourage you, if you're not a member, to have a look at the website and to see if you want to be part of our amazing community. Any questions, drop any member of the staff team an email and we will always respond to you. So thank you very much for what's been a really great webinar, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.